Thanks so much for coming back from lunch on this beautiful day outside and listening to us. My name is Markus. I work at cLabs on Mento. Mento is the stability platform on Celo, and I'm very excited to talk to you about Mento today. I have Slobodan with me. He will take over after 10 minutes, so we will share this experience. Thanks again for listening to us. That is us. Now I found the slide. Yeah, that's the title, Planetary Inclusion. And Sepp this morning already set the stage for us in a wonderful way. We would like to talk about bringing monetary inclusion and planetary inclusion together. So we want to talk about natural capital and sustainable stable assets, what we've built on Mento and what we want to build together with the community going forward. And we actually want to continue to keep talking to all of you about stability, about Mento. We actually would like to develop together with you. So we've written up first thoughts in a blog post, and you can find this blog post on the Celo forum. You can also find a link here to this forum post. So if you have any feedback on stability, on stable assets, feel free to let us know. Feel free to talk to us here at this event. And also feel free to just write in the forum to basically kick off the conversation, kick off the discussion about a new Mento and how we can build a new and better stability platform together. The whole Mento team is also here in Barcelona. We will do another session tomorrow where we want to gather all your feedback. But yeah, as I said, you can also give us feedback online. And Sepp already talked about it tomorrow, about the potential of regenerative finance or refi. And the narrow perspective on refi is Celo is really cool because it's carbon negative. Celo is very sustainable because it uses much less energy than the common proof-of-work platforms out there. It also uses less energy than a simple Google search, actually 10 times less energy than a Google search. But also Celo at the protocol level offsets the energy it uses, and therefore Celo is actually carbon negative. But we really would like to go a step further and build something that is truly sustainable, that maybe is able to internalize costs of natural capital destruction, that is able to, or we want to build something where the adoption of Mento, the adoption of stable assets, actually would be able to reverse the current ecological crisis. This would be something where demand for more stable assets would lead to more demand for natural capital, and that would be really, really cool. And this is how we already designed Mento, and this is what we want to do also with the new Mento. And you've heard the story from Sepp this morning, and I will repeat it at least very quickly. And Sepp this morning already said, whatever backs money, people tend to do more of or make more of. When gold backed money, people minted more gold because it's like printing money. And when cattle backed money, people farmed more cattle. Or where tea bricks actually was used as money, people produced more tea and used these tea bricks for transactions. So we actually want to build a Mento where more demand for the Mento stablecoins leads to more demand of regenerative assets. And you probably know the Mento stablecoins already, and I want to talk a bit about how we are able to grow them together with you, to grow adoption of the Mento stable assets together with this wonderful community. And there is room to grow. I'm not a big fan of fiat-backed stablecoins because they are more centralized, they're maybe less transparent in many ways. But even if there is a market for fiat-backed stablecoins, there is a lot of room to grow because the international remittances market is larger than $1 trillion, or prospected to be larger than $1 trillion by 2030. And stable assets are perfect for remittances. Stable assets are also perfect for payments, for lending, for borrowing, for saving, and of course for also mobile payments. And the mobile point of sales market is expected to grow to even a larger size, to 1.4 trillion. So there is room to grow for the Mento stable assets. The cool thing, even though the Mento stable assets as of now are a bit smaller than other stable assets out there, we have real use cases live. And we've heard of some of these real use cases already today. We've seen in the community there was the Grameen Philippines COVID relief program. Celo Real is live in Brazil, and you already can pay 1.6 million merchants with Celo Real in Brazil. The Impact Market Universal Basic Income program is using the Celo stable assets. So we have real use cases for Mento stable assets. And therefore, here we can make a difference. We want to build out the adoption of Mento stablecoins for real use cases. And actually, you already saw this. With the help of the community and the help with all of you, you can actually bring the Mento stable assets to even more countries in the world. And you also heard from Will already about Fiat Connect, which also helps with Mento adoption. But in the end, from a platform level, from a Mento perspective, we also want to build in a way so that everyone in the world can use these stable coins. So what we want to do to grow stable asset adoption is, in the end, we want to build a better Mento with all of you. And this is why we have also the forum post up, where we want to get all your feedback. We will do the session tomorrow where we want to get all your feedback. And we have 2 more talks today about new features in Mento, more technical talks that allow Mento to grow more. We want to propose a new design and want to get your feedback on it. And when we talk about Mento, we now already start to separate also a bit more between Celo, so that it's very clear about what we are talking. Celo is the layer 1. Celo's mission is to build a financial system that creates the conditions for prosperity for all. And Mento is the stability platform on top of Celo. So Mento wants to support Celo's missions by creating a world in which the economy is denominated in local, natural capital-backed stable assets that strengthen communities and preserve the environment. So when we talk about Mento, we mean the stability platform, and when we talk about Celo, we mean the amazing layer 1 that has all these nice features we like so much that make it the perfect layer 1 for stable assets. So what do we want to improve with Mento? In the first step, we want to make Mento really, really sustainable. Mento stable assets on Celo are sustainable in actually 3 ways. Economically sustainable, Mento stable assets are already stable, but we also want to work on features that make them more liquid. We want to work on features that make them more participatory, so that you as the community can help us in growing Mento adoption everywhere in the world. We also want to work on more technical features that make Mento technically sustainable, features that make Mento scalable and that, for example, makes it much easier to issue new stable assets on Mento. By now we have Celo Euro, Celo Dollar, Celo Real, and the team has put a lot of work into it to make it even easier and faster to add a lot of more currencies. And we will go into details later today what this means. And we also want to make it environmentally sustainable. We want to create these nature-backed currencies with Mento, so that more demand for Mento stable assets actually leads to more demand of these regenerative assets. And the talks I mentioned are actually today on Envision stage. So Volpe will talk at 5:50 today about an ecosystem of stable tokens and how we are proposing features that makes issuing more stable assets on Mento easier. And then also Roman, directly afterwards, also on Envision stage, will talk about sustainable stable asset protocol and the economic and technical features that we want to build in terms of proposing features that make Mento more participatory. So we're really excited to kick this off, to build a better Mento. And now Slobodan will talk a bit more about the environmentally sustainable part. Thank you.
Thanks, Markus. So as Seb introduced this morning, the concept of nature-backed currencies, I want to use the remaining 10 minutes to explain a little bit how this can be implemented on the Mento stable asset platform. And first we should take a step back and understand like how Mento works. So all stable assets are backed by a reserve, and as more stable assets are created, the reserve grows in size. Now, if the reserve has a fixed share allocated towards natural capital assets, I will refer to them as net caps throughout this talk, then this share towards natural capital assets also increases as the reserve grows. This creates continuous and incremental demand for natural capital assets, thereby creating capital flows towards project developers, environmental service providers, and so on and so forth. But you might actually still wonder, but how does that really work? What are those net caps? And it's clear that any token can only be a representation of activity in the real world. It's an abstraction layer. So the token will always represent either past, ongoing, or future activity and efforts that contribute towards the preservation or even the growth of the stock of natural capital that we have. And what this means is that net caps can be many different things. So if you think of a carbon credit, for example, it's a representation of an ecological state change. A carbon credit is nothing else but a representation of a ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere or not emitted into the atmosphere in the first place. A net cap could also be an ownership of an ecological asset, for example, a piece of tokenized land, of protected forest. It could also be ownership over pollution rights or emission rights. And it could also be a stake in a DAO that is active in the refi space more broadly. They could also be pure financing instruments like green bonds, forward contracts, or other financial instruments that allow projects to be implemented that couldn't be implemented otherwise. And all those net caps are then embedded into a broader infrastructure layer and market infrastructure that is building around the refi regenerative space, from exchanges to DAO tooling protocols to any tools and protocols out there that help making net caps more exchangeable, more tradable, more comparable. And I can only refer to the next session that follows immediately after this on the refi layer. It's also clear that the development of the net cap and refi space probably won't happen overnight. And we can imagine going this through some kind of life cycle as we are familiar with. So in the beginning, you will have probably lots of experimenting. There may be integration issues, there may be competing solutions, maybe even some redundancies. Use cases will be probably limited to crypto and very niche, use cases. But as this area develops and grows, all those different solutions will start integrating with each other. The solutions will start fitting together. They will become aggregated into larger applications that then also support larger use cases and larger liquidity. And eventually they will reach a phase of, you can think about this in terms of maturation, where use cases would also allow institutional use of net caps in the broader refi ecosystem. And I think there are a couple of points that are necessary to really achieve the large-scale use cases here. Probably standardization, a certain level of trust, and certainly liquidity in markets. And by looking at this development timeline, you can also imagine that the share in the reserve that is allocated towards natural capital is growing with it. So last year with CGP31, we were probably in the experimentation phase, we probably still are there, and we allocated 0.5% of the reserve towards tokenized carbon credits. And now as the market develops, also that share allocated towards net caps can develop to potentially a double-digit figure over the next years. What makes net caps slightly different is that they almost by definition have a real-world component attached to them. They're different to, let's say, a token that can be entirely understood within Web3, like an LP token that lives natively on-chain. And this also makes the assessment of netcaps as a reserve asset slightly different. For example, on the financial side, if you think about a netcap providing financing to some project developer, you necessarily have to think about counterparty risk. It can also raise legal questions. For example, to what extent can a token actually represent ownership of land? And are those rights actually enforceable, and where? It can raise technical challenges if the token is linked to some off-chain data sources, for example, some registries or some sensors that report information on-chain. And maybe, potentially most importantly, it also raises a question of, does the token actually do what we think it does? It's a matter of actually creating impact. And I think here we as a community should be very thorough and very critical and ask questions like, is it actually plausible? What does adding a token to the reserve actually do in the real world? It raises questions of feasibility. Once added, is there actually everything in place, including possibly any on-the-ground operation to really generate the impact that we want to see? And last but not least, is it measurable? So are there metrics in place that would allow us or anyone as empirical outsiders to really verify and check any impact that has been generated? And I think if done right, this can have great impact. And I pulled this chart from a McKinsey study on CO2 emissions. But actually, I think you can pull up any slide you want because they all tell the same story. Essentially, we need to damage less, and we need to restore the damage that has already been done. And I think how we as stability platform and as a stable asset provider can contribute is actually in 3 ways. So on the demand side, by acting as a committed, large-scale, long-term buyer, we can simply incentivize behavior and actions that we want to see more of. For example, emission reductions. On the supply side, we can also support and encourage innovative solutions, for example, in climate finance or at the intersection of climate tech and Web3 more broadly. And then there is probably a 3rd layer to it with the entire refi infrastructure space that is developing around that not only benefits the agenda of our stable asset platform, but also of the communities more broadly. I pretty much came to the end. So I'm really looking forward to discussing all of this either in person or on the forum. We have this QR code up again. Please also, stay in this room for the following refi sessions and go to Roman's and Volpe's talk later today. Thanks a lot.